The Dark Portal, the singular event that sparked the conflict between the Orcs and humans. It was a war unlike any other, a war that cemented its place in history and changed the face of Azeroth forever. If this is your first time visiting the channel, welcome. My name is Llane, and I'm in the middle of abridging the World of Warcraft Chronicle series. That means I'm taking the lore contained within the books and condensing it even more than it already is. I'm not adding the finer details to each event within the story, just sticking to what the books are telling us. Currently, we're on Volume 2, but if you want to start from the beginning, then I suggest clicking the link in the tab up above or in the description down below. That will lead you to a video that contains all 10 episodes covering the lore in Volume 1. But if you're already caught up with the story, then let's continue our journey into the Tales of Azeroth. As the Dark Portal neared completion on Draenor, Warchief Blackhand staged brutal mock battles to sharpen the Horde's bloodlust, viewing the Orcs' current state as too feeble for the impending invasion. While most Orcs, particularly those corrupted by the blood of Mannoroth, embraced this savagery, Durotan of the Frostwolf clan publicly condemned Gul'dan and the use of fell magic. Durotan's plea to heal the dying world instead of abandoning it were met with accusations of cowardice and treason from the other clans. Despite this internal friction, Gul'dan and Blackhand successfully convinced the majority of the Horde that conquering the bountiful world of Azeroth was their only hope for survival, as the ecological collapse of Draenor left them with no other alternative. To bridge the two worlds, Medivh and Gul'dan coordinated a massive ritual that required an astronomical amount of raw power. Gul'dan obtained the necessary energy by sacrificing nearly every remaining Draenei prisoner, draining their life essences in a single instant to create a massive magical spike. Simultaneously, Medivh unleashed his full Guardian energies within the Black Morass, a swampy region east of Karazhan, to rip open the Azerothian side of the rift. Once the connection was stabilized, Blackhand deployed scouts from the Bleeding Hollow and Blacktooth Grin clans to establish a foothold. These pioneers, accompanied by warlocks, began constructing a matching stone frame on the Azerothian side to ensure the gateway remained open for the full might of the Horde to pour through. The massive magical surge required to open the Dark Portal sent ripples through the fabric of reality that were felt by every magic-sensitive creature on Azeroth. While most could not pinpoint the source, Anduin immediately traced the disturbance to the Black Morass. There, she was horrified to find a war camp of green-skinned Orcs radiating the unmistakable fell energy of the Burning Legion. To her utter devastation, she recognized the specific signature of the Guardian's magic used to create the rift, confirming that her son, Medivh, had allied himself with the very demonic forces he was sworn to fight. Determined to stop him, Anduin traveled to Karazhan accompanied by her blue dragon ally, Arcanagos. They arrived during a high society gala, and Anduin entered alone, hoping to peacefully convince Medivh to relinquish his power. However, she quickly realized that she was not facing her son, but Sargeras himself. The Titan Lord seized total control of Medivh's form and revealed a soul-crushing truth. He had never been defeated in Northrend centuries ago. Instead, he had hidden a portion of his spirit within Anduin, eventually transferring it into her unborn son to wait for this exact moment of betrayal. The ensuing battle between mother and son shook the tower to its foundations, sending the terrified nobles into a frantic retreat. When Sargeras temporarily incapacitated Anduin, Arcanagos leaped into the fray to defend her, but the dragon was no match for the Guardian's corrupted might. Sargeras unleashed a horrific spell that incinerated Arcanagos from the inside out, leaving nothing behind but a charred skeleton. Witnessing the death of her friend fueled Egwin's rage, allowing her to draw on centuries of experience to break free and actually begin to gain the upper hand against the demon-possessed Medivh. Sensing his imminent defeat, Sargeras grew desperate and resorted to a depraved act of necromancy. Mirroring Gul'dan's sacrifice of the Draenor, he ripped the life essence out of the hundreds of fleeing nobles to fuel a final, overwhelming assault. He commanded Medivh to execute Egwin, but a small, flickering part of the real Medivh resisted the order. Instead of killing her, he used the massive surge of stolen life force to banish her from the tower and hurl her to an unknown location far beyond his senses, leaving the caretaker Morass as the only living soul within the walls. In the immediate aftermath, Sargeras retreated back into the shadows of Medivh's subconscious, leaving the Guardian confused and horrified. Medivh had no memory of the possession, but he was surrounded by the corpses of Stormwind's elite and knew he had fought his mother. Believing he had simply lost control of his powers again, he attempted to magically purge the traumatic memories from the mind of a nearly insane Morass. Despite his efforts, the Tower of Karazhan was permanently changed. It became a haunted, darkened place, forever prowled by the restless spirits of those Medivh had unknowingly slaughtered. While Egwin and Sargeras clashed within Karazhan, the first wave of the Horde began to solidify its presence in the Black Morass. Gul'dan was left frustrated when Garona reported that the hooded stranger from Draenor was nowhere to be found, as the warlock remained convinced the figure was a high-ranking demon in disguise. As the Orcs slaughtered or captured local human hunters, Garona used her unique linguistic gifts to learn the human tongue from the prisoners. From their fearful ravings, she learned of a mage champion named Medivh residing in the Tower of Karazhan, and she set out alone to scout the location, unaware that she was walking into the lair of the very stranger she sought. Upon arriving at Karazhan, Garona was immediately captured by a vigilant and brooding Medivh. Though she sensed a terrifying darkness within him, Medivh chose to spare her life, finding her mixed heritage and status as an outcast relatable to his own isolation. He was impressed by her intelligence and helped her refine her mastery of the human language, eventually offering her a standing invitation to return to the tower as a potential ally. This budding relationship provided Medivh with a rare moment of connection, while Garona found in the Guardian a figure far more complex and sympathetic than the cruel masters of the Shadow Council. When Garona returned to the Black Morass to report her findings, she was unaware that Gul'dan had been telepathically spying through her eyes the entire time. The warlock was shocked to discover that the powerful demon he feared was actually a human mage, a revelation that led him to underestimate Medivh and plan for his eventual execution. However, because he still craved the location of the tomb of Sargeras, Gul'dan ordered Garona to return to Karazhan as a double agent. Her mission was to embed herself in Medivh's life and extract every magical secret hidden within the tower's libraries, turning the Guardian's only potential friendship into a calculated act of espionage. Before we continue, I'd like to mention that if you're enjoying this episode, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. And if you ever feel like supporting the work that I do here, you can check out my membership options here on YouTube or over on Patreon. I really do appreciate the support from everyone who has already done so. I'm not really in a position to offer much in return, but what I do offer is early access to the videos when I publish them. But now, having said that, let's get back to our story. As the Orcish presence in Azeroth intensified, unsettling reports reached the city of Stormwind regarding mysterious figures haunting the Black Morass. These sightings sparked frantic rumors among the citizens, with many speculating whether these invaders were vengeful spirits, magically empowered trolls, or an unknown race from across the Great Sea. In response to the growing confusion and fear, King Llane dispatched Commander Lothar and a specialized company of knights to the Black Morass to investigate the threat. It was during this scouting mission that the humans first engaged the Horde in a series of violent, bloody skirmishes. Although Commander Lothar's soldiers initially secured several tactical victories against the Orcs, they quickly realized they were caught in a losing war of attrition. For every Orc fallen in battle, 2 more appeared to take their place, leaving the human forces increasingly outnumbered and eventually forcing a strategic retreat. Because the region was so heavily fortified by the Horde, Lothar's scouts were unable to discover the existence of the Dark Portal, but the commander warned King Llane that the enemy was clearly receiving massive reinforcements from an unknown source. Simultaneously, Orcish scouts informed Warchief Blackhand that the humans were now fully aware of their presence, signaling that the period of scouting was over and the First War was beginning in earnest. The violent clash between Anduin and Medivh remained a secret to the world, as the brutal deaths of the Stormwind nobility were conveniently blamed on the begrudging Orcish invasion of the Black Morass. While the Council of Tirisfal and the Kirin Tor were fully preoccupied with the demonic nature of the Horde, they still viewed Medivh as a spoiled socialite rather than a threat. Hoping to finally secure the Guardian as an ally, the Kirin Tor dispatched a promising young apprentice named Khadgar to Karazhan. Despite his trepidation about serving the infamously temperamental mage, Khadgar obeyed his superiors, entering a tower that was now visibly cursed with haunting visions and a suffocating shadow of morbidity. Unlike the many apprentices who had fled before him, Khadgar proved his worth by maintaining his composure in the face of the tower's supernatural terrors and Medivh's erratic mood swings. Recognizing the young man's intellect and perhaps seeking a reprieve from his own profound isolation, Medivh chose to keep him as a student rather than driving him away. In a calculated move, Medivh revealed his true identity as the Guardian to Khadgar, explaining that the Kirin Tor had sent the boy as an unwitting spy for the Council. Rather than being deterred by the political intrigue or the immense power of his master, Khadgar was deeply intrigued, resolving to stay and to learn from the most powerful mage in existence. Shortly after arriving at the tower, Khadgar was haunted by a vivid vision of himself as an old man leading an army against the Orcish invaders, a premonition that prompted Medivh to feign ignorance of the conflict. To remedy this, the 2 flew griffins over the Black Morass, where Khadgar was horrified by the sheer scale of the gathering horde and forced into a life-or-death magical duel with an Orc warlock. During this excursion, they encountered Anduin Lothar, who was leading scouting parties against the Orcs. Unaware of his friend's betrayal, Lothar urged Medivh to join the fight, while secretly tasking Khadgar with acting as a caretaker for the increasingly erratic Guardian. Back at Karazhan, the tension escalated with the arrival of Garona, who Khadgar initially viewed with hostility until Medivh intervened and insisted on mutual respect. As the young mage and the half-orc moved from verbal sparring to an unlikely friendship, Khadgar began to notice disturbing inconsistencies in his master's stories. He realized that while Medivh had claimed to know nothing of the Orcs during their fight over the swamp, he had clearly established a deep, long-standing rapport with Garona well before Khadgar's apprenticeship began. This calculated lie shattered Khadgar's trust in the Guardian, marking the first time the apprentice truly suspected that the defender of Azeroth was hiding a much darker agenda. As the Horde's main force transitioned to Azeroth, Warchief Blackhand made the strategic decision to leave the most volatile and blood-crazed clans, including the Warsong, Shattered Hand, and Bone Chewers, behind on Draenor. He feared their uncontrollable bloodlust would turn them into liabilities that might attack their own allies during the invasion of a strange new world. While the more disciplined or manipulated clans like the Blackrock, Bleeding Hollow, and Twilight's Hammer poured through the Dark Portal, Blackhand intended to let the sequestered clans rot in the Hellfire Peninsula until they could prove they were capable of following orders. Among the arrivals was the Frostwolf clan, led by Durotan, who had continued his vocal opposition to Gul'dan's corruption despite the move to Azeroth. Seizing an opportunity to silence his critic without making him a martyr, Gul'dan officially exiled the Frostwolves from the Horde under threat of total annihilation. Seeking safety for his pregnant mate, Draka, Durotan led his people north into the unfamiliar wilds. During this perilous journey, the shaman Drekthar experienced a spiritual awakening upon sensing Azeroth's native elements. Renouncing his fell magic, he received a vision from the spirits guiding the clan toward a remote, snow-capped mountain range that mirrored their ancestral home. Warchief Blackhand officially launched his War of Conquest by deploying rapid raiding parties to strike deep into Westfall, Brightwood, and the Redridge Mountains. These initial assaults were designed to sow panic among the human populace, as entire villages were razed and inhabitants were either slaughtered or forced to flee before Stormwind's patrols could arrive. Recognizing that this was a war of total annihilation rather than a local rebellion, King Llane discarded all hopes of de-escalation and appointed Anduin Lothar as the King's Champion, granting him the highest military authority to break the Orcish threat. Lothar proved to be a brilliant strategist by identifying the Horde's movement patterns and setting lethal ambushes along their retreat paths. Under the command of the loyal knight Gavinrad the Dire, human forces began to inflict significant losses on the Orcish raiders, sometimes wiping out entire parties without a single human casualty. The Orcs were stunned to find that the humans were a formidable foe, utilizing heavily armored knights on horseback to run down scouts, while Clerics mended the wounded with the Holy Light and the Magi devastated the Horde with arcane power. Tactics and magics that differed significantly from those used by the Draenor. Despite these tactical successes, Stormwind found itself dangerously isolated on the political stage as King Llane's desperate pleas for aid were ignored by the other human kingdoms. Lordaeron, the most powerful potential ally, was misled by a visiting Stormwind noble who publicly mocked Llane and falsely claimed the conflict was merely a domestic peasant rebellion. Combined with Stormwind's long-standing reputation for arrogant isolationism, the other nations felt no obligation to assist. Consequently, the kingdom was left to face the full, encroaching might of the Horde entirely on its own. In an attempt to claim territory reminiscent of their ancestral home, Kilrog Deadeye and the Bleeding Hollow clan ventured into the western jungles of Stranglethorn Vale. They quickly found themselves embroiled in an unspeakably vicious conflict with the native Gurubashi trolls, who viewed the Orcs as a new violation of their sacred lands. While the Bleeding Hollow were seasoned survivors of Draenor's jungles, the trolls utilized their superior knowledge of the terrain to draw the Orcs into deep, deadly traps. Despite being numerically weakened from their previous war with Stormwind, the Gurubashi conducted a relentless guerrilla campaign that resulted in horrific losses for the encroaching Orcish raiders. The stalemate in the south eventually reached a breaking point when Warchief Blackhand realized the Bleeding Hollow were dying in massive numbers for no apparent gain. Recognizing that the Horde's true prize lay to the north, he ordered a full retreat from Stranglethorn, redirecting Kilrog's forces to bolster the main front against the humans. Though the Gurubashi lacked the numbers to pursue the Orcs out of the jungle, they remained a fierce and isolated power within their borders, ever vigilant for the next invasion. This forced the Horde to postpone their plans for the southern jungles, focusing their full, combined might on the Kingdom of Stormwind. During the opening stages of the First War, the Holy Order of Northshire Clerics became a vital beacon of hope for Stormwind's soldiers. Unlike previous conflicts with gnolls or trolls, where the clerics' pacifism and mercy sometimes earned them safety, the Horde recognized the strategic threat of their healing and ruthlessly targeted them. Despite being unarmored and largely defenseless, these clerics remained on the front lines, suffering massive casualties while trying to ensure that wounded soldiers could return to the fight. Their unwavering bravery in the face of certain death solidified their legendary status within the kingdom's military. The foundation of this faith dates back over 2 millennia to the Troll Wars, born from the ultimate sacrifice of a general named Llane. His sister Merildar dedicated her life to his memory by caring for war veterans, eventually receiving divine visions of 5 ethereal forms. These entities bestowed upon her the pillars of the faith: holiness, protection, justice, retribution, and compassion. As she and others documented these wordless teachings, they discovered they could manifest actual miraculous power, leading to the birth of a religious movement centered on the belief that the light exists within all living things. This spiritual movement eventually became the predominant religion for humanity, centered in the northern kingdom of Lordaeron. Centuries after Merildar's time, the various traditions were formalized into the official Church of the Holy Light. Lordaeron evolved into the spiritual heart of the human world, serving as a sanctuary for those seeking wisdom or healing. The church established a complex hierarchy and built numerous holy sites across the continent to guide the faithful and preserve the tenets of selflessness that had defined the religion since its inception. Humanity's unique affinity for the Holy Light is deeply tied to their ancient lineage. They are the descendants of the Vrykul, a race of half-giants who were originally created by the Titanic Keepers. These mythic architects of Azeroth were known to command the powers of the light themselves, suggesting that the human's ability to channel this energy is a latent biological inheritance from their makers. This connection allowed them to master the light in ways that felt natural and intuitive, despite not being the first race on the planet to discover its power. To support the growing faith, the church constructed grand temples and shrines throughout the human kingdoms, particularly in the fertile region known as the Eastweld. This area became home to some of the most sacred locations in human history, including Light's Hope Chapel, Stratholme, Anderhall, and Tyr's Hand. These sites served as the bedrock of the faith, providing a structured environment where the king's champion and his soldiers could find spiritual resolve as the shadows of the Orcish invasion continued to lengthen over the south. During the early stages of the war against Stormwind, the Twilight's Hammer clan became a significant liability for Warchief Blackhand due to their rampant insubordination. Blackhand considered exterminating the entire clan as an example to others, but the ogre mage Cho'Gall intervened, offering to take official leadership and restore order. To the warchief's surprise, Cho'Gall transformed the clan into obedient and highly effective soldiers almost overnight, leading Blackhand to dismiss their previous failures and focus on the invasion. Cho'Gall's success was rooted in his understanding of the clan's obsession with the Void, an attraction that reached a fever pitch upon their arrival on Azeroth. The clan members began hearing the whispers of the old gods, monstrous entities of chaos imprisoned deep beneath the earth, far more clearly than they ever had before regarding the Void. This discovery drove the Orcs into a state of religious ecstasy, as they believed they had finally found the world where they were destined to bring about the Hour of Twilight, an apocalyptic end-time prophecy. The history of these entities reveals that the old gods were physical manifestations of power sent by the Void Lords to find and corrupt Nascent Titans, just like we talked about back in Volume 1. As a little refresher, eons ago, they landed on primordial Azeroth, enslaved the elemental spirits, and began shrouding the world's soul in shadow. They were only stopped when the Titan Pantheon, led by Agrimar, arrived and waged a cataclysmic war against them. Unable to safely destroy the old gods without harming the planet, the Titans instead shackled them in massive subterranean tombs, where their influence continued to seep out and corrupt beings like the Black Dragon aspect, Deathwing. Now, back to Cho'Gall. Cho'Gall, once a skeptic of the clan's mad ravings, became a true believer after sensing the raw power of the old gods for himself. He successfully manipulated the fanatical clan into obeying Blackhand by convincing them that the Horde's path of destruction was the most efficient way to facilitate the Hour of Twilight. He taught them to maintain a facade of loyalty to the Warchief while secretly serving their true masters, as the old gods themselves seemed pleased by the Horde's thirst for blood and chaos. To codify these dark teachings, Cho'Gall began a gruesome process of attuning the clan to their new deities. He branded the prophecies of the old gods onto the skin of pale orcs, then flayed the flesh to create pages for a macabre tome known as the Twilight Canticle. This book became a foundational source of power and motivation for the cult, ensuring that the influence of the Void would persist within the Horde's ranks for decades to come. After the Frostwolf clan settled in the frigid Alterac Mountains, Draka gave birth to a boy named Go'el, but the joy of the occasion was instantly replaced by horror when Durotan saw the infant's green skin. This realization that Gul'dan's fell corruption had biologically cursed the next generation was the last straw for Durotan, who decided he could no longer stand by while dark forces destroyed the orc race. Leaving their clan in the safety of the peaks, Durotan and Draka journeyed south to meet with Ogrim Doomhammer, while the shaman Drekthar used his powers to arrange a secret meeting in Loch Modan. During this meeting, Durotan explained everything he knew about Gul'dan's manipulation and his league with dark forces, while Ogrim revealed he had seen fell energies from the dark portal poisoning the Black Morass. Shaken by the truth, Ogrim and Durotan agreed that both Gul'dan and Warchief Blackhand needed to be dealt with at all costs to save the Horde from corruption. Ogrim returned to the Horde alone to play along with the leadership's plans, but he made a mistake he would regret forever by ordering his personal guards to escort the Frostwolf family home. These guards were actually loyal to the Shadow Council and, having overheard the entire treasonous conversation, they fell upon the three Frostwolves several days later in the wilderness. Though they fought bitterly and killed one attacker, both Durotan and Draka were struck down, and the infant Go'el was left to die in the frigid cold. Miraculously, the child survived and was found a day later by a hunting party led by Aedelus Blackmore, a human noble from the northern stronghold of Durnhold Keep. Blackmore was shocked to see creatures matching the description of the Orcs from Stormwind's war reports and decided to take Go'el back to Durnhold to be examined and raised under his watchful eye. When the traitorous guards failed to return, Ogrim sent loyal scouts who discovered the bodies and tracked down the Shadow Council assassins before they could report back to Gul'dan. This stroke of luck saved Ogrim's life, as Gul'dan remained unaware of his rebellious intentions, allowing the Blackrock warrior to bide his time and wait for the perfect opportunity to avenge his friends. The Horde's relentless slash-and-burn campaign successfully crippled Stormwind's economy, systematically destroying the kingdom's farms, trade houses, and food supplies. With the capital city facing the prospect of starving within months, Warchief Blackhand launched the next phase of his invasion, a march through the Redridge Mountains to establish a staging ground for the final assault on Stormwind City. The initial lack of resistance in the foothills emboldened the Orcs, leading them to believe the humans were too broken to mount a defense. But this overconfidence was exactly what Anduin and Lothar intended to exploit. As Blackhand led a small raiding party towards the township of Lakeshire, Lothar and his knights sprung an expertly timed ambush, roaring down the mountain slopes and nearly annihilating the Orcish force. The Warchief himself came within inches of death at Lothar's hand, saved only by the intervention of two Shadow Council warlocks whose fellfire forced the humans to retreat. Although the Horde eventually mobilized a massive secondary force to successfully seize Lakeshire and the surrounding territory, the narrow escape left Blackhand feeling deeply humiliated and furious at the perceived incompetence of his magical advisors. In a display of absolute authority that further stained his relationship with Gul'dan, Blackhand personally executed the 2 warlocks who had saved his life, blaming them for failing to sense the human trap. This summary execution enraged Gul'dan, who viewed the warlocks as his private assets and resented the loss of increasingly scarce magical specialists. Blackhand, however, dismissed the warlocks' protests entirely. As Warchief, he considered himself beyond question. Even as the internal rift between the Horde's military leadership and the Shadow Council began to widen under the pressure of Lothar's tactical brilliance. The ambush on Warchief Blackhand served as a sobering wake-up call for Gul'dan, who began to suspect that the upcoming siege of Stormwind City would be far more grueling than the Horde anticipated. He realized the Orcs were currently a diminished force. Years of famine and the absence of the powerful clans left behind on Draenor had weakened their ranks. Furthermore, Gul'dan's research into the history of the Council of Tirisfal and Medivh's annihilation of the Gurubashi trolls left him deeply paranoid. He found himself questioning whether the Guardian was a genuine ally of the Legion, or a wildcard who might eventually decide to wipe out the Orcs once they had served his mysterious purposes. Seeking a way to empower the Horde as he had on Draenor, Gul'dan turned his attention to Azeroth's potent elemental spirits, which were far more resilient than those of his dying homeworld. Shadow Council spies and the ogre mage Cho'Gall identified a massive surge of elemental energy coming from Black Rock Mountain, a smoldering volcano to the northwest of Redridge. However, Cho'Gall secretly discovered a darker truth that he withheld from his master. The spirits within the mountain were not merely elemental, but were in league with the old gods, the ancient enemies of the Burning Legion. The Shadow Council's attempt to subjugate the mountain's power ended in a violent disaster, as the Orcs were unprepared for the sheer scale of Azerothian elemental might. Warlocks who attempted to dominate the mountain were incinerated from the inside out by gouts of flame, as they had unknowingly trespassed into the domain of Ragnaros the Fire Lord. The Fire Lord ruled over a vast nation of dark iron dwarves and lesser elementals who ruthlessly defended their territory. The situation nearly escalated into an all-out war that the Horde could not afford to fight while simultaneously invading Stormwind. Disaster was only averted through the diplomatic intervention of Cho'Gall, whose begrudging connection to the old gods allowed him to negotiate with Ragnaros' lieutenants. An uneasy accord was reached. While the old gods were pleased with the Horde's chaos, they harbored a deep hatred for the Legion and refused to grant the Orcs any direct power. However, they allowed the Shadow Council to occupy a high-altitude refuge known as Black Rock Spire. This sanctuary provided the warlocks a place to operate in total secrecy, shielded from both the elemental lords below and the prying eyes of the Warchief. Gul'dan was ultimately satisfied with the acquisition of the Spire, blissfully unaware that his most trusted lieutenant was now serving a different set of masters. As tensions with Blackhand continued to mount, having a secure base of operations away from the main Orcish encampments became a strategic necessity. For the moment, Gul'dan decided to postpone his quest to harness the volcano's raw power, focusing instead on the final preparations for the conquest of Stormwind, while the seeds of a three-way betrayal continued to grow within the heart of the mountain. As the last bastions of the Redridge Mountains fell, the people of Stormwind looked out from their battlements to see a tide of iron that stretched as far as the eye could see. A chilling realization dawned on every defender that the ancient walls of their ancestors may soon become their collective tomb.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this kind of content, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing, please check out my YouTube, Patreon, or Twitch memberships. And a big shout out to all the names on the screen here. You mean so much to me. Thank you so much for your help. And with that, I'll see you guys next time on the Tales of Azeroth.